Hello, and welcome to Beyond Biotech, the weekly podcast from Labiotech. I'm Dylan Kassane, and this is episode 182 for the podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Clare Wareing, founder and CEO of Cumulus Oncology, who joins us from Edinburgh. With over 25 years of experience in oncology drug development, Clare has built a remarkable career translating scientific breakthroughs into life-changing therapies. Cumulus Oncology is curating a risk-adjusted portfolio of preclinical assets focused on high unmet needs in oncology. Their platform-agnostic approach prioritizes patient subgroups and precision medicine to boost success rates and drive value creation. In this conversation, we explore Clare's journey to and through biotech, Cumulus, and the current state of oncology in biotech, the vibrant Scottish ecosystem, and her vision for the future of 2026 and beyond. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Clare Wareing. Clare, welcome to Beyond Biotech.
Thanks very much, Dylan.
Clare, maybe you could start by just introducing yourself to the audience. Tell me a little bit about your career journey that's taken you to this point.
Yeah, sure. So way back when it all started, I was a PhD biochemist working in a cancer research lab. Have spent my entire career in the cancer research area. So I would describe myself as a serial entrepreneur. I've built a number of companies, exited a number of companies. I've spent, of my 30 years in the industry, I've spent all of those 30 years in clinical development, and 20 of those years I've spent in the services side of the business. So I actually was the founder of a company called Nexus Oncology, which was a niche oncology CRO providing phase 1 and phase 2 and ultimately phase 3 clinical development support to biotech companies, and exited from the CRO sector ultimately in 2015. And that's really when I started my journey with Cumulus Oncology. And I would say, having spent most of my career in clinical development and then now finding myself in drug discovery and development, that clinical experience has been incredibly helpful. Over the 30 years I've been in the industry, I have been either a supporting team member or a senior team member on 5 successful new drug approvals. They were, in no particular order, capecitabine, letrozole, abiraterone, ruxolitinib, and Campath. And I think seeing the journey that science takes all the way from the lab in the very early days to a product that gets onto the market for patients is a really valuable experience to have in any area that you find yourself in drug discovery or development.
I mean, taking something from these initial ideas all the way through trials and then eventually to approvals, there's a whole lot of project management skills that you learn in there, a whole lot of rolling with challenges, overcoming obstacles. That's got to shape the way that you actually approach the business today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think the skills you learn, the experience that you have in running clinical trials, which is, there's a lot of moving parts, running a business, setting up a business, running a business, all of those skills are, transferable skills that you can take into any area of the drug discovery or drug development paradigm. But yeah, that early experience and certainly the company setup and exit has been invaluable in what I then went on to do with Cumulus, or I'm doing with Cumulus Oncology.
Yeah, well, tell me a little bit about Cumulus Oncology, because this is a company that you've helped to found, that you got going. What inspired you to actually build something brand new like this?
It's a great question. I sometimes wonder myself, why did I start on this journey? But it was really very much inspired by having been on the services side of the business for 20 years, having supported a large number of biotech companies to actually take assets all the way from phase 1 and in 2 cases all the way to new drug approval. That was abiraterone and ruxolitinib. When I was running a services company that supported the biotechs that ultimately had those assets. And along the way, I had seen so many different assets available, so many different modalities. And I really wanted to go back to being on the sponsor side of the biotech spectrum rather than a service provider. I wanted to go back to being, someone that worked in biotech and set up Cumulus, really inspired by just the access to great science, access to great assets, you know, a great network of really experienced team members who were willing to join me on the journey. And I guess an understanding of what really good clinical data looks like and how very high quality clinical data can really lead to not just clinical benefit, but it drives a lot of deals in our sectors and in our sector rather. So yeah, that they were the key drivers, Dylan, to starting Cumulus Oncology, which I did back in 2017.
So tell me a little bit about what Cumulus Oncology actually is. What sets your model apart from other models of company creation?
Yes, it's again another really interesting question. And in thinking about, you know, the answer to that question, it really boils down to the fact that we are platform agnostic. So we don't have a particular platform technology in-house. We access platform technologies out there in the ecosystem. We are also modality agnostic. So we're not, you know, fixed to either antibodies or small molecules or degraders. We're actually very agnostic about the modality itself. We're really driven by the target, so the validity of the target, and then we start with the target and then look at, well, what's the best way to, you know, drug that target. And to date, we've done that with small molecules. We've done it via partnerships with drug discovery platform technology companies, or we've built the pipeline with, you know, either option agreements, license agreements, or in one case, asset purchase. And that really enables us to run a very lean ship, so we don't have the cost of a platform technology. We outsource all of our preclinical work and all of our clinical work, which we will be ultimately moving into the clinic next year. So everything is outsourced. It's a very virtual model, and that's where those project management skills that you mentioned earlier really do come into play. You know, knowing how to work with different vendors, different partners, to generate the data sets that you need to support the development of a given asset towards its clinical, you know, the start of clinical trials.
So is Cumulus an accelerator? Is it a startup studio? Is it some sort of conglomerate? How do you position yourselves?
Well, I mean, really, our core, we're a biotech company. You know, we have a pipeline of assets, so we're no different to any other biotech from that perspective. It's just, I guess, the way we build our portfolio is different because we weren't spun out of a university. We don't have a platform technology that we're wedded to. We have a number of platform technologies that we access. And I think that just allows you to be very nimble, very selective. It also crucially allows you to shut down projects if the data's not moving in the right direction. So, you know, you can take option agreements on particular assets, do a little bit additional work. If the data's not strong enough, you can then decide not to, you know, allocate resources, both capital and human capital, to a given project. And I think that enables us to enrich the success as we go. And that's maybe a slightly different way of doing it, because I think a lot of biotechs are spun out of universities or, you know, and nowadays, you know, there's all these kind of company formations around a single asset. A lot of the assets coming out of China, you know, that kind of company creation model, but that tends to be one company around a given asset. In our world, you know, we have a number of assets. We just choose to build that portfolio like in the way that I've described. And I think that is a slightly different way of doing it. And I think it also means we're a bit more capitally efficient maybe than a company that's built around a platform. And you know, there's pros and cons to each approach. You know, platform technologies enable you, if the platform's proved, you know, it's kind of the gift that keeps giving. In our model, I think it's probably the best of everything. And I really, you know, the label of accelerator, venture build, you know, in a way, it's the result of the work that is important, and that's the portfolio of assets. So, you know, I just prefer to call us a biotech company because it's easier and everybody understands that language. You know, you don't have to then explain what you are. How we get there is probably the magic and what defines us and is different. But we ultimately end up with a portfolio of assets that we want to take into the clinic and then, you know, have some exits in the future by M&A of certain assets in the portfolio.
Tell me a little bit about the portfolio. You've got a number of different assets in the portfolio now. Tell me what's there.
Okay. So, I mean, before I say what we have in our portfolio, what I will say is it's a mix of first in class and assets where there are others in the class out there. So the kind of the safety in numbers, but then the challenge of differentiation when there's more than one versus, first in class where the competition isn't there. And so that's really the what underpins what targets and assets we select because we want to get that balance. And so we have a first in class asset, which is a GPR68 negative allosteric modulator. It's a GPCR. We work with a platform technology company in Switzerland for that company. So it's structurally enabled, which, that's a real kind of USP for the project. Having the structural enablement is really, really helpful in GPCRs. So, a target gaining a lot of validation in a number of indications, actually. There are a real kind of uptick in the number of publications in a number of fields. So very, very interesting target, some evidence of efficacy in the longevity space and a role for it in longevity. I actually think the overarching theme with that one is its role in inflammation. And there's a real clear mechanism of action rationale in both inflammation and fibrosis, which obviously are diseases of, not just aging, but a number of inflammatory conditions that become chronic as we get older. So that's GPR68. We also have a PARG inhibitor, which is in the DNA damage response area. That's an asset class where the validation of the target is very strong. We're targeting the same pathway as PARP, which is very well trodden, but PARG does it in a different way, and it does it in a PARP-resistant setting. So, the challenge with that one is we're not the only one developing a PARG inhibitor, but it also gives us an opportunity to differentiate in terms of clinical development strategy and patient subgroup, as well as, differentiation in terms of the combination approach, because many of the DNA damage response assets, including PARP, do find themselves in clinical practice in combination. So that's two of them. And then we have a very early GTPase project where we're not going public with the target, but it's a very well validated family of targets. And that one is a collaboration with the University of Eastern Finland, again, using platform technology. And in that case, it's a very sophisticated use of molecular modeling and supercomputer power, which we have available to us via the collaboration with the University of Eastern Finland. So hopefully that gives you a flavor. The most advanced project is the GPR68 program, followed very closely by the PARG program, PARG inhibitor program.
You mentioned those patient subgroups. Why are they important to the strategy there?
Yeah, so that is my favorite question, actually, and one that I'm really keen to, give a really good answer to. And it's really based on being in clinical development for 30 years and having seen the evolution of therapeutics in the space and, seeing the early targeted therapies, the HER2 targeting therapies, having seen more recent examples of that with the MEK inhibitors, the BRAF inhibitors, a whole raft of other pathways where if you hit the right pathway with the right asset in the right patient subgroup, you can have quite a significant, clinical response and therefore clinical benefit. So I think for me, it's very simple. The more you enrich for the right patient group, the more success you're going to have in the clinic, as long as your underpinning science is correct. So I think that patient enrichment, it's crucial. And I've seen, all sorts of different clinical development programs in my career. And the ones that stand out are the ones where the companies we worked with, and this is from back when I was in the CRO sector, the companies knew the patient population that they were targeting right from the get-go, right from phase 1. And those programs were much more successful than a more general approach where it was, all come with phase 1, not really quite knowing which patient populations. So I think the way the market is going, the way the industry is going, the use of tools, AI, molecular profiling, all of that, I actually think that patient enrichment or precision medicine, or however you choose to call it, is here to stay, and it's only going to get more prevalent and it's just mainstream really, as far as I'm concerned. And I think we're starting to see it used in other therapeutic areas too. So, obviously rare diseases, because they are very much defined by a given issue with a given pathway. So that's a no-brainer in the rare diseases, but also in inflammation and autoimmunity. I think we're starting to see patients subgrouping within some of those inflammatory conditions as well. So I think the precision medicine approach, it will be applied across the board
You
in the
mentioned,
fullness of time.
you mentioned tools there as well, artificial intelligence tools, some supercomputing as well. Is this becoming more and more important in your drug development than it was maybe when you got started?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. And I know there is a lot of hype around the word, artificial intelligence. It's open to interpretation. In my world, for me, artificial intelligence is chemoinformatics and bioinformatics. And it's the ability to interrogate biological data to give you a more robust handle on target validation, but also patient subgroup that we just talked about. And then in the chemoinformatics space, it's really a tool to, do simulations outside the lab, which you then test in the lab to get much more high quality, chemistry. So you know much more about the qualities, the features that you need from your small molecules to hit a given target. So I think, AI is definitely here to stay. I think the hype will be replaced by validation of the tools that actually do work and those that do translate into the clinic, because I think the all important thing with all of this is, does it help us find the right drug, a better drug for the right target in the right patient population? And if those tools, like the AI platforms, enable us to do that, then it's going to make us much more efficient as an industry. So, we use AI, we use chemoinformatics, we use probably many of the tools that many other people in the industry use. We use a number of bioinformatics platform providers to help us untangle biology, to really help us get that robust validation of the target and the patient subgroup that we can then model before we go into the clinic. So we're much more confident about our patient subgroup before we even start the clinical trial process.
So you've got multiple assets in oncology, you've got all of these tools, all of this momentum moving you there. Maybe we can look a little bit broader though. What sort of trends are you seeing in oncology drug discovery today, just sort of at an industry level?
Yeah, another great question, Dylan. I mean, wow. Where do I start? I just think there's been such an explosion of the number of modalities available to us in oncology. We'll start with small molecules because that's where Cumulus operates at the moment. And obviously the availability of new small molecules, new targets is there. And that effort to find new therapeutics in new patient subgroups is ever present. And that's really what drives a lot of what we do at Cumulus. But you've also got all the molecular profiling that goes on in terms of cell surface receptors. And that drives a lot of the interest in the biologic space. So the monospecifics, the bispecifics, the ADCs, the radio-labeled ligands, which are not just antibodies, I know, but that's just for starters. That's sort of the biologics area. And then, we've got all these molecular glues and degraders where, used to treat targets that are considered, I'm going to say undruggable, but it's not undruggable. I like the phrase not yet drugged, because I think the way it's going with all the chemoinformatics tools that we have, we are yielding, or the platforms are yielding much more information about the druggability of a given target. And it's not that things are undruggable, it's just that they are not yet drugged. And those platform technologies are going to help us do that. So, for me, it's the abundance and sheer volume of targets, assets, driving the industry. How you combine them, how you find your patient subgroup. It's not an easy process, but all of it is ultimately leading to better outcomes for patients. So, people in the past have talked about curing cancer. That's definitely, happening. I'm really happy to say. And I think in other cases, what we're doing is making cancer a more chronically managed disease where patients have multiple lines of therapy and their survival and, how many years they live is going out and out and out. We've seen that in multiple myeloma. We've seen it in colorectal cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, melanoma. I think we are starting to see improvements in pancreatic cancer. So I think it's a matter of time before all these new therapies just keep moving out, the survival advantage that the therapies give patients. And that's a fantastic thing. And it's a great thing to be involved with. And, it's been something I've done for my whole career. And I don't think I've ever seen an environment where we have quite so many modalities, targets. The challenge is, how do you find your clinical path, through where's the unmet medical need? And that comes back to the patient subgroups, all of that we talked about earlier.
So what's driving the deal making in oncology right now then? Because it's still 50% of the biotech market. It's still a huge part of the biopharma industry. Where are people investing? What's driving them forward?
I mean, I think ultimately, I'll answer that question by saying clinical validation. So I think, for new targets particularly, where you've got clinical validation, and I think we're seeing that with the PD-1 VEGF bispecifics. There's people are really getting on board with the opportunity there, but it's all driven by early clinical data. So I think deal making is very much driven by clinical validation. And if you have an asset that's clinically validated or an asset class that's clinically validated, it makes that asset class more attractive to the industry. So that would drive deals, maybe not necessarily assets in the clinic, but assets in the same class where clinical validation has been demonstrated. I mean, everyone talks about the patent cliffs, and I mean, I think pharma just traditionally have enriched their pipelines. Patent cliff or no patent cliff, as a pharma company, you need to keep developing drugs. You need to keep replenishing your pipeline. You need to keep abreast with developments. So I think the M&A activities that we're seeing is probably heightened by kind of the patent cliff scenario, but I guess it's also driven by what I just talked about, the absolute abundance of assets. So, it's a great time to be a pharma company looking for new assets because there's a lot out there, both preclinically and clinically. And I think companies that get involved at the preclinical stage with first in class and the more novel, innovative therapies will actually put themselves in a very competitive position, 5 years from now. So I think the deal flow, we're starting to see it moving back, moving away from, well, not away from, but rippling, this kind of ripple effect of the deal flow going into the earlier stages as well, not just clinical stage assets or clinically validated assets, but also preclinical. There's a recent deal, actually a UK company, Dark Blue Therapeutics, which was sold to Amgen quite recently, and they were preclinical. That was a preclinical portfolio. So yeah, I think it's a great time to be doing deals if you're a pharma company, a small one, a mid-tier one, or a large one.
One of the things we heard at JPM and we heard it at BioEurope as well, it's pretty consistent. Every year we hear that if you've got the right data, there's always money out there for oncology companies who have good data, like you say, with clinically validated data. That's fantastic. But there's still some challenges in accessing venture capital in Europe, in North America as well. What do you see as the real challenges for companies? Is it just getting that data or is there something else?
I think there is definitely a strong emphasis on data and as much data as possible. So I think, and that's the kind of chicken and egg, because, without the investment, you can't generate more data. I think sometimes it's not actually necessarily access to capital, it's access to the right capital. So, I read something on LinkedIn, actually just earlier today, and it really resonated with me that, the person who posted the article that I read was talking about investors being in three categories: the builders, the followers and the leaders. And, at Cumulus, we've been really lucky to have investors who've supported us right from that very early stage to where we are now. I think there are a lot of followers in our industry, and that creates its own challenges. But it's the leaders, I guess, the investors who are going to go with the new platforms, who are going to support earlier stage assets where there's still a little bit of work to do, and who are probably prepared to roll up their sleeves and not just make capital available to you, but actually, help you design the preclinical plan or the clinical plan, connect you to other investors, connect you to pharma companies. So, I wonder if the challenge isn't actually access to capital, it's connecting with the right investors for what you have. So that kind of match of, because there's so many investors out there, we know, and I'm sure investors get very jaded by all the outreach from so many companies, because so many companies have been, cash starved and desperate for new capital. But I think it's that match. And when I say there's a lot of followers, I don't mean that in any insulting way. I just mean that, there are impetuses and there are trends in our industry that are sensible to follow. And so you kind of need the investors that aren't the followers, but, either the builders, depending on where you are in your development, or the leaders who are going to look at what you've got and say, actually, I see where you're going with this. I can help you.
You mentioned just before that Cumulus is collaborating with a group in Switzerland, also in Eastern Finland. You're actually based in Scotland, in Edinburgh there. How is it that you're building a global company, a global partnerships out of Edinburgh? Is it unusual?
I really, it's something I never really think about. I think the fact I'm based in Edinburgh is just, I'm just based in Edinburgh. It doesn't represent any barrier or impediment to working on a global basis. And I've always worked on a global basis, and I've always been based in Edinburgh. So it's never been an impediment to building businesses in the past. Nexus Oncology had offices in Canada, US, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Australia, and we did all of that from Edinburgh. So, I guess it's a mindset partly. And I think oncology is a very collaborative area anyway. So I think that all the progress we've seen in oncology discovery and development has often been based on global collaborations. So I think you maybe have to work a wee bit harder to, network and be out there and travel. But I've never found it to be an impediment. And, we have board members in Boston, Massachusetts. As you said, we've got collaborations in Switzerland and the universities in Finland. We're in discussions with a company in Korea at the moment on, a potential new asset. So, I think maybe it's a mindset, Dylan, but it's never been a barrier for me. And I guess University of Eastern Finland, they seem to collaborate globally with so many different groups as well. So it doesn't seem to be an issue for them either. And they're even further north than we are.
Scotland still also has this reputation for incredible fundamental research, world-class research universities there. Is there a way that they can easily translate that into a startup scene, into startup biotech, spinning out some of that research?
Yeah, and that is actually, I would say, one of the features of the Scottish biotech ecosystem is the access to absolutely top-class science and the funding environment. I talked about those builders and followers and leaders. There's a lot of capital available, a lot of capital. I say a lot, it's all relative. But there are, really good access to that build phase. So the kind of the spinning out of university startup. And, when you're then in the scale up phase and you want to access more global capital, that's when you do have to look further. So, I think the access, the fantastic, you're right. I mean, the Scottish universities, I think, punch above their weight in terms of the academic output and the number of spin-outs. And I mean, we've got great examples. I'll single out the University of Dundee and their protein degradation infrastructure. I mean, they've been phenomenal in creating new IP and creating spin-out companies. So, again, no impediment for the startup, but it's that scale-up journey, which I think is challenging for everybody, wherever you are. Going from startup to scale-up is where the challenges can sometimes be, and that's where you have to work a little bit harder for, global collaborations, global access to capital to really, make it.
Well, Cumulus is well beyond the startup stage right now. What sort of milestones are you looking forward to for Cumulus this year and maybe into next year as well?
Yeah, so I've talked about two of the programs earlier, the GPR68 program and the PARG inhibitor. We're looking to nominate candidates from both of those programs in 2026, and then from there, the IND enabling work before you go into the clinic is the next stage. So clinical development in 2027 is really an exciting prospect for Cumulus, but also something that's very close to my heart, given that I've worked, so much of my career in clinical development. So they're key milestones. And then some of the work on the patient subgroups and the actual work that's ongoing to define the patient population that we will move into the clinic in are also really important pieces of data coming through this year.
I asked you before about the impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning on drug development. Do you see that just speeding up even more as we move to 2030? Will you be investing more in it at Cumulus?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anyone that's in discovery and development these days who isn't embracing AI and platform technologies will probably not be as effective. So I think they're tools. At the end of the day, they're tools to make us faster, to help us make more data-driven decisions, prioritize projects, to find the patient subgroups. And for sure, the availability of data is just mind-boggling. I talked about the number of modalities, and when you marry all of that with the data and then the power that some of these models and platforms have to enable us to interrogate that data to enable decision making, I do think that the future is very, very, I don't want to say rosy, but the future is more data driven for sure, and using data to make best decisions to improve success rates in the clinic, I think for me is where the tools are most powerfully deployed.
Beyond the work that you're doing just there at Cumulus, is there a trend or a movement in oncology that you've got your eye on, something that excites you a little bit more than just the newest flash in the pan?
Yeah. I don't honestly think there's one particular thing that I would single out. I think it's more the collective intel that we have and the absolute abundance of targets, modalities that excite me, and the ability to apply those tools to really figure out the best way to develop those drugs or not to develop them. Because I think making decisions about not taking a particular asset forward is every bit as important as taking something forward. So it's more that excites me, just where we're at, a real intersection of data, insights into not just targets, but patient populations and medical needs. Yeah, I think it's going to really continue to improve those survival rates in oncology. So it's that really that drives me and excites me and keeps me motivated and keeps me on my toes.
Finally, Claire, where can people go to learn a little bit more about Cumulus and the work that you're doing?
So our website, I would direct people to the Cumulus website, cumulusoncology.com. If people want to look me up on LinkedIn and see some of the posts and connect with me on LinkedIn, that's also fine. So I'm Clare Wareing, C-L-A-R-E, Wareing, W-A-R-E-I-N-G. So if people want to look me up on LinkedIn and link in with me, I would welcome conversations with people who might be interested in what I've had to say today.
Claire, thanks for joining us on Beyond Biotech.
Great. Thanks, Dylan.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out all the latest news and analysis at Labiotech.eu. I hope wherever you are in the world, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.